Good evening, Jam Talkers. It's always such a pleasure being here with you, and I'm ever so excited to share my views and, of course, have sound discussions on some of the critical issues that affect us here in our society. This platform, of course, is one that is used to discuss some very hard-hitting and at times extremely controversial topics. And at times, we bring to you some out-of-the-box and unorthodox leaning, but nevertheless, always interesting, always educational, always exciting topics being discussed here by all our hosts and of course, sometimes panelists. Today's topic will be one of those out-of-the-box kind of thinking type of discussion, especially for us here where we're a democratic society with strong freedom of speech and actions. And of course, as a woman, it is a very delicate topic for me to discuss. And of course, I am always known for championing the call or cause for justice and equality for women in society in all spheres. But I'm also known to be objective and call a spade where it is necessary. That will never change. It's not about leaning to one side or the other. It's about pushing the right agenda and being on the right side because it is the right thing to do. It's the right cause to champion. It's the right voice to be heard. So that is who I am. I've been branded a feminist in many situations because I defend women a lot. Though ironically, I most times get no love from the sisters, more so the tear down and the fights. But on the matter of principle, and of course, for the bigger picture of support of our sex or gender, I will always fight against injustices and marginalization that women face in society in all areas. And I will continue to do that without any fear or apologies. But ladies, there comes a time when the truth needs to be spoken for exactly what it is. There can be no pussyfooting around facts and reality. And of course, the reality is that some of us women contribute to our plights and life of extra hardship and stress because we have never really managed to take control and personal responsibility for our lives and actions. We are at times treated badly by the opposite sex because we allow them to, or we just downright lay ourselves careless, as my grandmother would say. And then when we end up in a situation where we feel trapped in a cycle with no outlet for escape, we always tend to point the finger elsewhere, but most times when we're pointing out the index finger, the big finger is always pointing back at us. Remember that. I'm very big on personal responsibility. I accept the fact that the system and our circumstances have a big role to play in our outcome and the end result for the life we live. But I will tell you that we play an even bigger role in our future. Our future turns out from our actions or inactions, the decisions that we made or didn't make, or the lack of personal responsibility for our lives, always leaving our future in the hands of others. So today, I will have a very open and frank discussion on the topic: should the number of kids a woman have be based on her affordability, or should we legislate? Should we make it into policy? Should we make it into law? Or should we just let let everybody have out their lots, so to speak, as one woman had come on TV. And even though she is basically living a very pauperized life, a life that is plagued with financial burdens, she said that she's going by what the Bible told her, and the Bible told her to have out her lot. So, that's another issue. I am discussing this topic with full appreciation for the many different struggles a woman goes through, the many different challenges, the fears, the pain, the failures, the disappointment, the hopelessness at times, the loneliness, and of course the broken dreams and promises, because a lot of women get themselves into certain situation because they trusted someone. They took the promises for being, truthful, and they acted on that, and they basically planned their whole life around the promises made to them by somebody else, most times a partner, because at the initial stage I always say no man, unless it's a mad woman, but no man ever comes to a woman as a bad person, as an evil person, though at times if we look carefully the signs were always there, but not very obvious. I always say that no man comes to a woman displaying his bad behavior, attitudes, or acting out of character. They always come like, a knight in shining armor. And of course, a lot of times the women are misled, and whatever premise they entered into that relationship with, was the furthest from the truth and from the reality of who this person is. So I'm not beating down the women, because I know when you get yourself into a situation, you just didn't, get there knowing that this is exactly what you're getting into. I know and I understand why sometimes your struggles is the way it is, and why life has turned out the way it has turned out. But at the end of the day, we need to go back to reality, and the reality is we alone, of course, are responsible for our lives, for our future, for our actions, for our inactions, for our mistakes. At the end of the day, when we look into that mirror and we're pointing the finger, it will be pointing back at us for one reason or another. All right, but I will just say in my lifetime, it's only 2 men I've ever had a conversation with who they're also in the insurance industry, one in life and one in general. But both these men love and adore their wives to the highest level and speak about them with such joy and pride. But what is most interesting about these 2 men is that they have taken the time to fully understand the different issues and struggles a woman goes through on a daily basis, right throughout the different phases or stages of a woman's life. And I remember one telling me that he loved his wife, but they kept getting into fights and arguments, and that, every time that they get into a fight, she would be telling him, you don't understand because you're a man. And because of that, he decided to take some time to understand exactly, what women go through, what are their fears, what are their struggles, the different issues that they have to deal with, some from just their biological makeup, and others from just daily life struggles. So, he told me that he took the time to understand as much as possible about women, from their biological makeup, reading up on, the different hormonal changes, the moods, PMS, what is expected at menopause, every article or book that dealt with, what it takes on being a woman that he could find to read. He told me that he read, and he said that, after taking some time to understand women more, that was when he started to love and appreciate his wife even more. And of course, the arguments reduced because he kind of understood then and there that half the struggles and the different issues that he now understands that the wife faces as a woman almost every day, he doesn't think he would be able to endure. And I remember he said, not even to mention the 5 to 7 days of bleeding each month. It takes a special being to endure that. So, after taking some time from loving his wife enough to try to spend some time, invest some time in understanding her better, that's when he truly realized how much he loved her. And I wish more men in society would take that approach, because I think if they did, they would abuse women less. And of course, when they impregnate these women and leave them with the children to struggle on their own to make ends meet daily, I think they would think twice. They would be more merciful and compassionate towards the women, and then we would see less single parents being women, just all over the place trying to keep food on the table for their children. So I just mentioned that to say to my sister that being a woman, I know it's not easy in general. Naturally from our biological makeup, some odds are already against us. And I'll tell you that our skin color and social status will even make our struggles worse. If you're white or light skin, there naturally will be more support for you in the system in general. But if you're black and poor, at times you can feel like you're trapped in a vacuum with no breathing space, and you're suffocating, grasping for air, but you cannot get out. I am sure that this is how many of the women who found themselves with having too many children that they can't afford feel. But is that really justification for your situation you have found yourself in, or were you just irresponsible in how you lived your life? And that's a very strong question, because sometimes we find the excuses and we always take our contribution to the problem. We take ourselves away from it, and we stand on the outside looking in. But it's our problem, it's a part of us. So we were very integral in the causation in the first place, because the problem is ours at the end of the day, even though there are external factors that would have contributed. All right. So let's get into the discussion on the topic. I personally feel it's irresponsible and selfish for women to end up having more children than they know they can afford, especially when it's the children who had no doing. They come here, suffer the most, and end up being used and abused, at times sodomized, end up in a life of crime, or sometimes they get killed. The way I think, children didn't ask to be here, so the least we can do as parents is to ensure that we bring them here if we can afford a decent and good enough life for them. And I will say, back in the days, women could have as many children that they could conceive, because life was much easier and the system of support was always there. You were most times never short on food, though it might have not been steak or lobster. And whether your parents could afford it or not, you went to school. And I remember back then, teachers and principal made it a point of their duty to go to homes of parents if the child or children were not seen in school for 2 days or more, to find out why weren't the children in school, or why wasn't the child in school. The whole village then and community had interest in your children and helped out the best they could. especially in cases where there were absentees as fathers. Life in general was way easier, more affordable. Things were just much easier, so we could survive, though the struggles were there. But the reality is, for the past 2 decades or more, we have moved away from that kind of a society into a more selfish and strenuous one, where the daily struggles are almost insurmountable, and to just basically put it plain and straight, the struggles just turn up on everybody, and nobody, even if they want to, they really can't find the time to be burdened or to be bogged down with your problems. So nobody really cares much about what anybody else is going through anymore. They can't find the time because they themselves are struggling. And we're living in a society now where every tub, as old people would say, have to basically not even sit properly anymore, catch on its own bottom. And you would think that women would become more aware and in tune with the changes of the times in which we now live, and then change your approach and your whole outlook and life to match the times. But no, what we're seeing is that young women who by themselves are struggling to survive, they are the ones who are having way more children than they can afford. And I just don't understand the rationale behind it. Yes, everybody is prone to make a mistake. And you make one mistake, you might even make 2 mistakes. But at what point in the series of mistakes are you going to catch up and say, boy, life is so hard. I am struggling by myself. Look at my children. When I compare to how they are living, to how my neighbor's children are living, it is not fair to them. At what point do you put the interest of your children before the need to go get pregnant again for another man because you might be coerced, or you get carried away in the moment, or whatever it is? At what point in time do you put the natural love of a child to want the best for any child, for you to stop and think that this is not fair to the children that you're bringing into this world, and you must start to take personal responsibility for your actions, because unless you were raped, there's no excuse for you to end up having so many children and send them on the street daily to go fend for themselves, expose them to all sort of abuse, molestation, and most times have them pushed or be prone to end up in a life of crime. At what point do you love your children more than how you love the pleasure of even having sex? At what point will you make a natural sacrifice of yourself for your children? Love them enough to not want to bring them here without the necessary affordability, because a man is not guaranteed to stay around, to stick around. And not because he might have money, because the saying is, go get pregnant for a rich man because you might trap him. There are many rich men who women have to be taking them to court to get money, and they struggle every month because they're still not paying. So always think about your personal development and put yourself in a situation where, God forbid, the man didn't stick around and you end up being a single mother, that you will be able to provide a better life for your child than what you had for yourself growing up. And men, don't think that you're not equally to be blamed, because you know that you can't afford to care for the amount of children that you're producing. You know that personally you're struggling. You can't hold on a good job, or you don't have the skill set to land you a decent paying job, but yet still you walk around from community to community and drop a seed everywhere you land. and you know, everywhere you go and you drop a seed, you just left it there without even a care as to how the nurturing of that seed will take place, to determine the outcome of the seed that you planted. And when I look around, I don't see the men who have the big jobs having ton loads of kids. It's the men who cannot even afford one walk and drop a seed everywhere they go, all around the country. Them just walk and as layman say, breed somebody. And sometimes the women are to be blamed. To be fair, I proportion more blame towards the women, because if a man comes to you and you're in a relationship with a man and he has 8 children, or before getting in a relationship with you, and you have observed that he's not supporting his children, why would you want to have a child for that person who has proven himself to you as not being a father figure or somebody who you would feel comfortable having a child for, that he will be a father to your children? And a lot of you women who love to get involved with men and jump to have to get pregnant for them because you want to take the man from somebody else, and all you end up with is just another child. You need to start to think smart, because from ancient time, a child has never been able to hold a man in a relationship, more so now. So you have to think smart and be more proactive in your family, and practical and smart in how you plan a family, and that don't make it a willy-nilly thing that he comes and he wants a child, so why not just give him a child, even though you see that he has not been a good father to other children. And I will agree that a lot of the men, they lie. Sometimes the woman doesn't know the amount of children that he has in other communities or in other parishes, especially the police them and some of the soldiers who walk and drop a seed in every parish that them transfer you to. And at the end of the day, every parish you come into is only one child you have, and every station them transferring you to only leave a child there. Women, the responsibility is yours. You are the one that will have to carry this child for 9 months. You are the one that will more so be left with the responsibility, whether you want to or not. You can't run away like the men. So naturally, you are the one who will end up have to care for this child by whatever means necessary for the next 18 years or so. So the most of the responsibility for family planning rests with you, whether you want to believe it or not. So you better start take control and take charge and personal responsibility for your life. Take it out of the hand, the decision making for family planning out of the hand of the man. There's no guarantee that he will stay, or when he leaves, he will continue to take care of that child. Alright, so men, yes, you're equally responsible, but I put most of the responsibility on the women. Most of it on the women. Women, there's no excuse for unwanted pregnancies, as every clinic in almost every community have free birth control of all different types and methods, from pills, condoms for both males and females. So if the man don't want to wear the condom, there's one for you, the female. You can get your IUDs or diaphragm, you can get your injection, you can get any form of family planning method there, free of cost, and any amount. It will not cost you anything. So why is it then that so many of our women who are already in a vulnerable situation and can't afford a good life for themselves end up with so many children. And just Wednesday, I overheard, I was in a phone repair shop, and I overheard a young man questioning this young lady as to why, nice looking young lady, and he was questioning her as to why she haven't had any children yet, and she was there explaining that she don't think she's ready because she can't afford to have a child now because she has other goals that she has not accomplished yet, and she wants to go about it in a planned way, a planned approach to family, to having a family. And of course, this young man's response was, God sent you here to breed and have picnic. You don't need to wait on anything. If you have a child, God must provide. And I just had to shake my head because I realized then and there that this is the same approach many men took, and they get the women to buy in. When they go out there and basically, layman term, breed up people daughter and leave them with children to suffer, all they do is just plant the seed because God will provide, or so they think. And if God doesn't provide, the politicians will, the area leaders and dons will, or just, of course, leave the children to the perverted man who is going around and or come into your house and molest your young son or daughter because the mother is dependent on him for money. Not to mention the freaks and nasty men who are picking up the street boys, the little homeless boys, the boys hustling on the streets to survive, and taking them to places and sodomizing them at nights. So now you will see that with this warped mentality of some of the men who produce these children, it has to be the responsibility of the women to take full control of her life. And of course, I'm asked that question many times. Why don't you have children yet, and you're getting old, and all sort of questions you're pushing at you. Because, it's like you must have a child, no care whatever situation you're in. And when you try to approach a planned approach to life and family rearing, and that you're spending time to focus on other parts of your other areas of personal development, and want to ensure that when the child gets here, he or she will enjoy being here, you're made to feel like you're doing something wrong, and even at times ridiculed. And at times I ask you, if your mother had taken that approach, you wouldn't be here because she couldn't afford. And of course, they don't understand that we must progress as a people. We cannot be trapped in the same mindset and behavior of 3, 4, 5 decades back. The only thing that is constant is change. We must evolve in our actions, in our thoughts, in our behavior, in our attitudes, in our minds. What might be wrong, what might have worked or was okay 30 years ago, it might not be practical now. We have to deal with our current situation, where we are now as a people. What is our reality now in the present? But for some strange reason, some people find it hard to evolve. They find it hard to progress. They find it hard to move forward. And they justify everything by what happened in the past and what worked in the past, as if they're still living in the past. Right? So women, it's our bodies. We have full rights and control to it. If you're not mentally and financially ready for children, don't live your life so that you end up with too many that you can't afford because you got caught in a situation. As I said, mistakes do happen. Circumstances will come along that will take away your negotiation power, control. But I don't think that ending up with 6, 7, 8 children and all of them suffering or ended up on welfare is anybody's fault but yours. And that's just plain and simple. I'm not beating down anybody. I'm not being oblivious or insensitive to anybody's situation. But at what point in time will you come to grips or grasp, with your situation, with the reality of what is happening with the children who you already are struggling with, to say that, you know what, enough is enough. Let me take a different approach. It is unfair to these innocent babies, innocent children who had to end up in this kind of a life of struggle and hardship because you did not take a responsible approach to them being here. It is not fair to your children, and you can't tell me that you love your child or your children and you just have them and send them on the street to go struggle. And the women who put out their young daughters to older men for her to use her body to earn money to take care of you and the rest of children, and know that your young daughter is being abused and being held at the mercy of some old perverted man, but you close your eyes because you want the money. I think they should lock you up for a minimum of 10 years because it is unfair that you brought this child into the world and this is the life you present them with. And at no point in time you said to yourself, let me walk down to the clinics and get some whatever method work for you, because enough is enough. You can't tell me you love your children and you continuously expose all of them to the same lifestyle and standard of living. I can't fathom loving that. I can't figure, I can't picture, I can't imagine any form of love in that kind of a situation. Because if you loved your children, when you end up with one more than you could afford, you would go back to the drawing board and try to go do the best you can. Make the sacrifice of yourself. You go on the road, go struggle. Go on the road, go expose yourself to anything you want to expose yourself to ensure that they are provided for. Because when you were having fun and getting pregnant, these children weren't there. It is not their responsibility to fend for themselves or to fend for the home and to ensure that you wear the wig and get the nails done and pay the light bill. It's your responsibility to do whatever it takes. Outside of producing another one that you can't afford, to add to those that you already can't afford, you go out there, expose yourself and provide for your children. But it's unfair. It's unfair to have your children struggling and living this kind of hardship when they're so innocent to everything that got them here. We need to stop finding excuses, and we need to stop thinking that all we need to do is to go have them because, the state must take care of them. How much being on PAD can provide for your children? Every 2 weeks you get a little money from the government. What can that do to provide a good standard of life for your child? How can that educate him? How can that feed him well? It makes no sense that you just continue willy-nilly, just continue having children for having children's sake without no concern. If you think having more will allow you to get more out of the government or more out of the welfare services, that's extremely selfish. Because I know that the PAD program does not provide much that will afford your child the close enough to a good standard of life that they deserve. So that would just be a selfish thinking that. And if you think that is the Don, the area leader and the Don that is going to afford, that is going to provide for your children, they now become the owner the ownership of the Don. The Don can call for your daughter anytime he wants. The Don can command your son to go do any form of wrongdoings because he owns your children, because he's the one you run to when you need food. Why not ask the Don for some money and go learn a skill? Go to an evening class and take one subject every 9 months then, until over a period of time you get a few subjects or you have a skill and you can, hustle and fend for yourself until life change. Not every woman is lucky that they will have 1 or 2 children or 3 children, and they all, or even 8. My mother had 8 of us, but we passed the worst. But that was then. That was back then. It doesn't happen anymore. I see a woman 30 years old and she having over 6 children. Come on. At what point do you realize that you have to take personal responsibility for your life first and for the lives that you're bringing into this world? We need to get a grip of ourselves, women. We need to get a grip of ourselves and start to take full control of our actions. I believe that the best care is prevention. I do believe that prevention is the best care. And it is obvious that left unlegislated, the men and women who irresponsibly produce more children than they can afford to care for will continue to rise out of proportion and we'll continue to see these children being exposed. And that is the part that gets me. It really gets me to see how exposed these children are to harm and danger, to being abused, to being even killed. How many children annually go missing? The mother don't know where they are. That is the part that really, really get me. The harsh reality that these children ended up in, the danger that they ended up in because the mother didn't care enough to say to herself, I have these 3 and I'm struggling. Enough is enough. Let me try a different approach. Let me walk down to the clinic and get some condoms. Let me walk down to the clinic and get some pills. Let me walk down to the clinic and get some diaphragm or IUDs, or go tie off tubal ligation, for persons to understand what tie off is. We need to start taking personal responsibility for our lives and the lives that we bring into this world as women. The men are to be blamed, but the women have more control. It's your body. Even if he doesn't want to use a condom, it's no excuse. Pills are there. Contraceptive pills are there. Diaphragms are there. Female condoms are there. So what is the excuse? I would love to hear the excuses. That makes sense. So I honestly think, seeing that we have not been able to get people to be naturally responsible, I think the law needs to chip in. I think government needs to take control of this situation to ensure that women have the amount of children that they can afford. And men who take sorry about that. Seeing that, as I said, sorry about that. Seeing that we can't get people to take personal responsibility for their lives and to ensure that they act mature and act responsible, be proactive, be practical, be rational. I think that the law needs to basically take control of the situation. And I know this is a very, very tricky situation. I know the human rights advocate will quickly identify the implications for breaches of rights of a woman to choose to have any amount of children she wants. And I say, of course, have any amount of children you want as long as you can afford to care for them and they won't end up on the street being toy boys or girls to promiscuous and freaks who call themselves men, as long as they won't become preyed on and be placed in vulnerable situation just because you cannot care for them as parents. And some may even turn to a life of crime over time, putting their lives at risk and becoming a burden to society, and over time, putting other people's lives at risk. We need to look at this thing very deep. We need to really, 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 really not just deal with this on the periphery, but we need to really put some deep thinking into seeing how governments, through policies, through different family planning campaign, how they can get people to understand that for the economy to grow, for your personal growth and development, for your growth of your country in general, the economic and social benefit that is derived from having enough children, just enough that you can afford, just enough that the state can reasonably help you with is the way to go. And it starts from education. We need to get the family planning committee or board or whatever agency that was in place, get them back active, let the discussion start, let the activities start, let the campaign start, because it's educating these young, especially the young women, and providing incentives for them to not just go out willy-nilly and have children. That is going to ensure that we get these women to stop just have children and put them out there. Get the women to have some self-pride, get some self-esteem, want to invest, get some self-confidence, want to invest in themselves, want to be a strong, powerful woman of society. See some value in who they are, other than for a man to just come and get them pregnant and leave them with many children. The government needs to get active. We cannot continue to have our children, for women just to have children, and they are struggling. Yes, government, you try to help with providing some social benefits, but it is not enough, and not everybody is getting it. And I'll tell you, we'll never have enough to give to everybody. That is the reality. Especially in the proportion or the amount that is needed, the government will never be able to provide for all the children, all the fatherless children, all the children of these unemployed parents, single mothers. That is our reality. The country is financially drained. We are struggling to push the country forward on a good path. So the reality is, even if the government was sincere in assisting you to grow your children and provide a good life for them, the reality is the affordability will never be there. Will never be there. So we have to start thinking practical and get a grasp of what the reality is, what our situation is. Take some responsibility for your life, man. I see women come, I hate picnic, and me a suffer. And at what point you realize that you were suffering, and for each added child you will only suffer more. And it's not that you are suffering. What really, really pains my heart is that the children are the ones who suffer the most. And if you can't see that and think twice before you just randomly go get pregnant, when every type of birth control method is available to you in your communities at every clinic, and at no point in time you think that, let me be proactive, let me be smart, let me be responsible, let me be disciplined, let me take control of my life and the life that I will bring in the world. Especially for many of you who have had children already that you just cannot afford. Who are you going to blame? How can you come and say it's government fault? Is your mother fault because she didn't throw you out early? Is the man fault because him trick you and get you pregnant and leave you? It is your fault. That's the reality. It is your fault. Because all you needed to have done is to walk down to the clinic. Someone will drive past the clinic every day, gone downtown, gone buy KFC and gone put on false ear and false nail and false eyelash while your kids are struggling. While the dreams of your children die daily. And you never sit and think deep. And I'm pushing for the government to get back to our the family planning initiatives and policies. I remember some time ago we had a 2 is better than too many campaign. And of course, when you go into the clinics, you would see the poster with the 2 children. And around that, you would see all sort of, articles and readings and effective family planning methods. And procedures and stuff. But after a while, I can't tell when last I even see that ad on TV anymore. It's just a free for all. No, just go and have children because somebody will take care of them, even though the child is not taken care of properly. It needs to stop. And if you can't do it by yourself, I think the government needs to step in and ensure that it is done. If you don't see it fit to end this cycle of poverty for yourself and your children, somebody needs to rescue you from yourself and rescue your children from you. Plain and straight. But the government needs to go back to your family planning committees and get your policies going there, get your education going, get the incentives down to the young women to keep them in school, to keep them in the training institution, to push them towards getting a skill. I think because we are a democratic society, the best way to drive this policy is through incentives, through education, through communication at the community level, on the ground, starting from in the schools with the young men and the young women. It can work. A lot of times we just never got to these young girls early enough, and they got trapped in that vacuum, as I mentioned before, and they just get trapped in a cycle, and they think the best way out is to get pregnant for another man. And when that happens, the best way out from that failed relationship that left you with a child or 2 is to get pregnant for another man, and the cycle continues, and you end up with a lot of children that have no father, and they become children of the state, and they end up in the hands of some very, very evil people who use and abuse them. And poor children who never had anything to do with them being here, and never had anything to do with you just being irresponsible and didn't care enough to think ahead about how these children that you're bringing in the world will live and what kind of life will you be able to give to them. We need to get a grip of ourselves as women, and we need to stop pointing the fingers all around, because when you push out the index finger, the thumb is always pointing back at you. Remember that. But government, this is something that you need to act on. Get the family planning policies. I don't think we have a population size issue. The issue is not to manage your population size. The issue is to manage the amount of children that are born into situations that the parents cannot care for them, and they have become children of the state. And if you want to grow your country, if you want to grow your economy, you have to do something about that, because at the end of the day, you have limited financial resources. You're already burdened as a country, highly indebted. You're fishing around for a growth agenda right now. So you know the reality. Your reality is you will never be able to help these fatherless children, homeless children, children living in poverty to the extent that they really need to be helped. And that's just our reality. So you need to do something to manage this situation. And you need to act fast. And it starts from within the homes, in the communities, in the schools. You need to get your education going. You need to get the information and self-development, self-pride, sex education, education and birth control, education and building the self-esteem of young women, provide the incentives that will steer them away from that kind of a life into a life where they want to have a career, they want to have a profession, they want to be like the First Lady, Mrs. Juliet Holness, and other professional and progressive women in society, instead of ending up with children that they themselves are struggling with, and sometimes they have to make some bad calls that really place their children's lives at risk, many different type of risk that is. So we need to aggressively get back to policy and legislation in how we manage family planning and parenting, and how we manage to capture our young children from in the homes, in the communities, in the school, and how we will grow with them, and how we will mentor them, and how we'll stick with them while their life progresses, and how we'll monitor them and work with them to ensure that they don't make the mistakes that their parents made, but they will change the cycle. And it can only happen through education, communication, information, and providing the resources that are needed. We can't be China or other communist country where we infringe on human rights to get this policy driven. It has to be a collaborative effort. It takes dialogue. It takes working together with these young girls and boys in the community. It takes a nurturing and an understanding approach. It doesn't take condemnation. And this is not something that is new. A regulated family planning situation is nothing new. It has been done in other countries. The only difference is in most of the country it was implemented to manage population size, which we really don't face. Our issue here is that too many of our women who are people, men and women who cannot afford children, are the ones who are having the most. That is our problem, and it is just and as urgent a problem to address and to improve as if we were plagued with a population size issue. All right. We will look at some countries that have experimented with such law, and of course we'll look at how successful it was in meeting the specific objectives of those governments, and what was the growth and development, or what is the growth and development and standard of living in these countries that have a legislated approach to family planning, or a country that put it to law, to policy, to regulate the amount of children a family or a woman can have. And of course the most prominent one is the China one-child policy. So we will briefly have discussions about some countries that have used legislation to manage or to control, for want of a better word, the amount of children a woman can have. And I will start off, with the China one-child policy. The China one-child policy is a part of the family planning policy for China and was implemented as a population control policy for China. It was introduced in the period between 1978 to 1980, and of course it kind of phased out in 2015, where it was phased out and replaced with a two-child policy. In 2007, 63% of the Chinese population was subject to a strict one-child policy, with an additional 53% being allowed to have another child if the first child was a girl. The provincial governments imposed fines for violations, and the local and national governments created commissions to raise awareness and carry out registration and inspections for compliance. The government reported that from that policy, 400 million births were prevented, but of course other sources vary in the amount of births that were prevented since that policy was implemented to 2015. On October 29, 2015, it was reported that the existing law would be changed to a two-child policy, and of course this new law took effect on January 1st, 2016. The one-child policy was managed by the National Population and Family Planning Commission under the central government since 1981. The Ministry of Health of the People's Republic of China and the National Health and Family Planning Commission under the central government were made defunct, and a new single agency, now the National Health and Family Planning Commission, took over in 2013. And when I was doing my research, what I noticed is how these countries that practice, that legislate family planning, how they tie family planning with health, and they do it through a commission or an agency or a committee that is specifically set up, that was mandated to take control of this policy. But they always tie family planning and health, and it was strategically driven. And this is my advice to the government, they need to get active, get back on board, take control of, have your National Parenting Commission, your National Family Planning Commission tight with health, because effective family planning, especially through the use of condoms, will also reduce the financial burden to care for persons who get exposed, especially to HIV, and you have to provide the free medication, through the hospitals or through the clinics for them. So it's like a one stone killing two birds kind of situation. And as I read on, when I was doing my research, I realized that most of these countries that legislate family planning, they tie family planning with health, and I think that's a good combination. And they have agencies or committees strategically, and I have to be repeating it because I'm sending the information out there, and giving some ideas of the approach that must be taken for it to be effective. That, we need to research these countries, though their objectives were different. Most of them were for population control at the forefront, but then the bigger objective, because the reason why they wanted, and it's not so different from us, from what we want to achieve and what our objective is, because we want to grow this economy. We want to improve, the social ills and the economic plague that we have been going through for so long. We need to really grow our economy, to improve, to ensure that we can, put in the necessary infrastructure, invest more in providing good health care, good education, keep your society safe, provide a better lifestyle for people and standard of living for people, to be more aligned to a first world country as it relates to infrastructure and development. It's not so different, because when you control your population size, the end result is that you will have more money in your coffers to push towards economic growth and development, to fund your projects, to fund your initiatives that will drive growth and development in the economy. So the end result is not different. The end result is the same. So we'll discuss a little history behind China one-child policy. Of course, this policy was created after Chairman Mao launched a campaign to encourage families to have more children, leading to a birth rate of over 4 children per family. At the same time, there was a food shortage that resulted, in part, from Mao's failed economic planning of the Great Leap Forward, during which 30 million Chinese died from man-made famine. After that, a new regime of Chinese leaders took over, who believed that forcibly restricting population growth would lead to great economic prosperity. And prosper China did. Trust me, China is now classified as the new world power. Prosper China did. As a result of a coercive policy was born. This coercive policy was born that impacted the most ultimate aspect of any Chinese citizen's life. Of course, the family. The violation of this law would result in the offender having to pay a fine that could be as high as several times their annual salary. To enforce the one-child policy, the Chinese government used a quota reward system. The planning officials would carry out the birth control policies and those who don't meet the quotas would either be punished or lose all opportunity for promotion. The policy drew a lot of criticism because of its brutal enforcement. Officials met quotas by compelling pregnant women to undergo abortions, often under threat of job loss, colossal fines, or even personal harm. Women who refused such coerced abortions would have been arrested and restrained for forced abortions. The most high-profile case was Feng Jiami, whose 7-month-old baby was forcibly aborted on June 2nd, 2012. In response to the universal condemnation of this forced abortion, the Chinese government began to outlaw late-term abortion at the national and provincial levels. Unfortunately, enforcement of these laws have been slighted and forced abortions still take place. The last one occurred on March, the most globally publicized one, that is, was on March 22nd, 2013, when another 7-month-old baby was forcibly aborted. So you'll see that there are a lot of breaches of human rights, very obvious breaches of human rights there in how China tried to enforce their one-child policy. Some of that is not just breaches of human rights, but I would think criminal offense. But in a communist country, who fights the law and win? Who fight the government and win? What kind of right do you have, really? Because most things is basically controlled by China. Is on a mission, an obvious mission, to take over the world and to really set up themselves right across the globe in some strategic places and in some strategic ways. China is on a mission, and they have been very successful. Their economy has grown rapidly over the decades, and it's mostly because they have, I'm not condoning the blatant breaches of human rights there, but they have basically used a legislated family planning policy to control the amount of people that the government will have to afford for, and have mothers spend more time into the workforce producing, and more monies being floating around to drive investment and development. And you can see that China has reaped the reward. As I said, I'm not condoning the obvious breaches of human rights. And I really, really hope that if it continues, the UN, the United Nations, and other international bodies will come down on them, because I think they can enforce that policy without the blatant breaches of human rights. But I must say, for that population control policy that reduced the burden on government's coffers, so they can have more money to drive production and have more people. Women spend more time in the workforce than on maternity leave, having a child every 9 months or every year. You can see that China has prospered for that. We look on Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, the Two is Enough campaign in 1970 encouraged people to have 2 or fewer children in each family. And of course, this contributed to the reduced birth rate in the country. This policy was driven through educational means The Family Planning Association of Hong Kong provides family planning advice, sex education, birth control services to the public in general. So there has not been reported any report of any human rights breaches, because what Hong Kong used mostly to push their Two is Enough campaign was education, advice, and birth control services, making birth control easily accessible to people. Well, we do make it easily accessible here in Jamaica, but I'm not sure that we're doing a good job with the information, communication, and education. I think that is where we're failing here in Jamaica. Yes, the clinics have all types of birth control that you can use or that you need, but what is missing is the education, the information, the communication. So we need to solve that problem. Iranian authorities encouraged families in Iran not to have more than 2 children when conducting family planning. So their policy in Iran lasted from 1990 to in the 1990s to late 2006, and it was reported that Iran's government declared that Islam, Muslim countries are extremely religious, and they make most of their decisions based on their religious belief. So what the Iranian government did was to declare that Islam favored families with only 2 children. So they got compliance by, reinforcing religious beliefs or doctrines. And as I tell you, these Muslim countries, they use their religion, as a guideline for basically everything they do. So if the government, affect their minds through telling them that Islam will favor families with only 2 children, you guarantee that they will all endeavor to have 2 children. What the family planning program, when it was initiated, Iran's health minister, and there was another country that tied family planning to health. Iran's health ministry launched a nationwide campaign and introduced contraceptives of all types: pills, condoms, IUDs, implants, tubal ligation, vasectomies. In 2006, the government population policy, however, changed when Ahmadinejad, I hope I pronounce his name properly, Ahmadinejad, called for reversal of Iran's existing 2 children policy. 2 children is enough policy. That is what they had called their policy. 2 children is enough. That's the policy that they campaigned on in implementing their 2-child policy. But later in 2012, the government that was in place stated that Iran's contraceptive or family planning policy had made sense 20 years ago, but its continuation into later years was wrong. Alright, so you see there in Iran, a Muslim country where government saw the need to legislate family planning through education and birth control and through their religious belief. The United Kingdom, though it's not a policy, it's a discussion that have been taking place. In July 2007, the think tank Optimism Population Trust, which is now the Population Matters advocated what the Daily Mail described as a two-child policy to combat population increases and climate change in the United Kingdom. The article stated, and I quote, "According to the report published by the Optimism Population Trust, Britain's high birth rate is a major factor in the current level of climate change, which can only be combated if families voluntarily limit the number of children they have to two." In October 2012, the Conservative Party proposed policy of only paying child's benefits for the first two children of unemployed parents has been described as a two-child policy and has been fronted by the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions and the former leader of the Conservative Party, Ian Duncan Smith. So what the UK, though it's not an open policy as in China or Hong Kong or Vietnam, what they're doing is through subtle ways where you see there where they only provide benefit for your two first children, which indirectly they're telling you that we want you to have only two children. So subtly they have managed to implement a two, or they tried to, the Conservative Party then tried to implement a two-child policy in how they distribute benefit to families. And also they made a call that with asking people, not forcing, not legislating, but asking people to voluntarily work with the government in limiting the number of children that they have to two, because by doing that they will be able to have more resources on hand to grow the economy, and also it is a means to manage climate change, the impact of climate change. So you see where that is, another country that has been toying with using family planning policy to control the amount of children a family can have. Vietnam has had a population policy for over 50 years, which was launched by the Vietnamese government in the early 1960s in North Vietnam and continues in a modified form even today throughout United Vietnam. The policy emphasized the official family size goal to be 1 or 2. In 2014, Vietnam has had an estimated population of 92.5 million people, which represented 1.28% of the world's population. The reason behind Vietnam's two-child policy was due to the sharp population increase of largely poor and rural people having children, similar to what we're facing here, where the mass of who have the most children are the people who are poor. Maybe not in rural, because I think maybe most of them are in urban setting, but the bottom line is lack of affordability. They are the ones who can't afford to have children are the ones who have the most. Something is very wrong with that equation. Obviously wrong with that equation. Vietnam's family planning policy was developed before those of other countries such as China and India. The government used a system of information, education, communication in their campaign, and of course public accessibility to contraceptives to curb their population size. See, they never breached any human rights, what they did was to educate, inform, communicate, and make accessibility to contraceptives easy. In 1982, the Vietnam government practiced various family planning measures, including, well, I spoke to early. In 1982, they did. Well, they didn't. It wasn't forcibly abortion. They made the allowance of abortion and the creation of the National Committee for Population and Family Planning, but they never practiced forcibly abortion like China did. But I think, and this is another topic for discussion that we will have to get into, but I do believe it is the right of a woman to choose if she wants to abort or if she wants to keep. I don't think anybody else should be placed in that decision-making position for her. It is her body. And as long as she is in a sane state of mind and all her cognitive skills. Right, as I was saying, where in 1985 the government increased incentives for people who adhere to the policy and penalties. This is in Vietnam for those who violate the family planning policy. And of course, in 1993, the Vietnam government issued the first formalization for unified Vietnam 1 to 2 child policy as a mandatory national policy. And the campaign for the policy combined advertisement and education to promote a smaller family so people may enjoy a plentiful and happy life. And I was saying, this is how we need to implement this policy. Set up your national committee, family planning committee, tie it with your health ministry. Have this committee strategically set up to manage this process. Throw in the incentives that is going to dissuade young girl from just willy-nilly, randomly have children. But we need to push the value structure and development objectives. We need to encourage a collectivist mindset in which individuals see the bigger picture. It is not that you want to have out your lot. That is not enough. It's not that you just want to have a child. It's not enough. You have to take a more planned and structured approach to bringing innocent lives into this world. And you have no excuse, women, because every form of... If you continue, as I was saying, to put added strain and burden on the limited resources that the government has to work with, the social benefits that we're expecting and the economic growth that we want to see will never materialize. And that's a reality. In Singapore, the two-child policy was called Stopper 2. The population planning in Singapore spans two distinct phases. First was to slow down and reverse the boom births that started after World War II. You know, the men came back from war and they just wanted to have sex, and as much sex as they could. And, of course, as many children came. And then, from the 1980s onwards, their two-child policy, or their policy that was called Stopper 2, from the 1980s onwards, was to encourage parents to have more children because the birth numbers had fallen below replacement levels. In 1960s and 70s, the antinatalist policy flourished, and the Family Planning and Population Board was established, initially advocating for... of course, 10,000 rupees is $203 or 3 months imprisonment for parents that have more than 2 children. So, as we see, India had imposed fines to as enforcement for their two-child policy. 10,000 rupees, 203 US dollars, or 3 months imprisonment if you have more than 2 children. And a third child will not be eligible for service from the government. The Kerala Women's Code Bill, which purports to support the welfare of mothers and children, encouraged access to free and healthy abortion at government-funded facilities and access to free and medically safe contraceptives. The Times of India reported that the bill would also bar religious leaders from encouraging parents to have more than 2 children, and no person, no institution shall use religion. Used some of the most humane approaches to in their enforcement procedures. But what I noticed with all of these countries is that they have some flexibility. They have an objective for a period of time, and they implement this law and internet connection. So because China is really one of the most visible countries that have used legislation to control population size. We will look at some pros and cons of China's one-child policy over the decades that or the years that it has practiced this law. The pros, let's start with the good, the positive. The pros, starting off, China is still one of the most populous countries today. It has managed to control its population growth, but also managed to become a superpower in the world's economy, so we see the quality of healthcare, education, and the Chinese society in general fared out much better under a one-child policy, other than if people were left to willy-nilly have any amount of children they want to have out there a lot, for want of a better word, without any care as to how your life will continue and that of your children will fare out. The one-child policy we spoke about, how the economy benefited and how the environment was positively impacted, because left unchecked, if the growth was left unchecked, China, with all this expenditure for welfare and to provide all the benefits for an overpopulated society, China would not have been left with the economic resources it has to basically trying to take over the world as it is trying to do now. And of course we saw the advantage of being able to provide quality health care and education, and to provide a lot of good social benefits in general for its people. We'll look at the cons. So the one-child policy, or the disadvantage, the cons or the disadvantages. The one-child policy has actually failed, according to many critics. This is just some critics now, as China still has remained the most populous country with 1.3 billion people. So they're saying that yes, the population is still too large. You still have 1.3 billion people, who you have to cater for and you have to care for. So it wasn't effective, and I don't know what is really in the minds of these critics. They get disconnected. So they're saying that the ratio or the proportion of males to females really leave a lot of Chinese male without wives and girlfriends, and nor do they have any chance of having one. Come to Jamaica, there are a lot of women out here who is seeking a husband or a boyfriend to start. So that I don't see that as a major problem. There are women all over the world. In some countries, you have more women than men. So there are other populations that are skewed towards having more women than men. So if the Chinese men who presently don't have wives or girlfriends in China want to find wives and girlfriends, all they need to do is to book a flight, go visit a country that really have the ratio to male to female skewed in favor of females. The one-child policy is another con. They said the one-child policy has ensured that there is an aging population in the country, which will take away the advantage of being the most populous, with more elderly people. Right, so, that is not a real crisis for China now, because, even with the one-child policy, it has managed to replenish its society through, progressive or successive generations. And another, con that, the critics have put forward is that the one-child policy makes it difficult for kids. According to tradition, parents stay with their children when they get old. A man has to take care of his parents, the parents of his wife, and the wife if she's not working. And this put enormous pressure on the individual. This is applicable also to a working wife. This is one reason why so many people in China live from paycheck to paycheck, despite the country's record of unprecedented economic growth. Having siblings to share the financial responsibility for parents and grandchildren. It is a matter of urgency that government pay some attention to this social problem, because it has many implications, especially for the children and your overall growth agenda. We don't have to look towards, pushing any policy that will violate or breach human rights or the rights of a woman. We can implement the fines, but for violation, that is. But I think what will be most effective in driving this policy and making it a success is the use of good communication, good interventive measures, educational approach, a strong educational approach, educational sex, self-esteem, growth and development, great incentives for women, for young girls to want to be a professional person, to get an education, not for good incentives and effective monitoring and control is a must, because as I mentioned before, we had started the process. The advertisement were there, two is better than too many. The program was there, the exposure was there, the education was coming on board, and then all of a sudden everything disappeared. And what we ended up with are little boys and girls on the street, very exposed, being abused, being used, child labor at its highest level. And we need to rescue these children through legislated family planning, fines, punishment, incentives, education, communication, information, accessibility, and all the support that we can find to ensure that this policy works. So it's a long discussion. It was wonderful being here